So this great narrative, I think it's going to be even more fascinating because then hopefully people can use this stream not so much for going deeper into potential theories, but to have a firm basis, a historical basis on what this empire is and where it comes from. Now we have this Khazarian force, is this confederation or this consolidation of power, again, in this very, very important region. We see the Don River, the Volga River, the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea all come together. This is essential. This is the nexus of the Silk Road.
O Lord of hosts, be with us, for we have none other help in times of adversity but Thee. O Lord of hosts, have mercy on us.
This is David Patrick Carey with Church of the Eternal Logos, and tonight I want to talk to you guys about Khazaria, a forgotten empire. And this is, as is noted in the title, a sponsored stream. Shout out to our good buddy Pim Orsos. He is responsible for today's stream. Pim is the one who sponsored today's stream, asked me to read a controversial text by Arthur Koestler called The 13th Tribe. The 13th Tribe. And today's stream, then, is we're going to be tackling a very interesting and enigmatic piece of history. You know, I kind of consider myself a connoisseur of the historical. And I was not as privy to the political, to the influence and impact this Turkish nomadic tribe who converted to the Judaism, the religion of Judaism, in the 700s, the 8th century. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. However, I'm quite conscientious and aware of where the controversial argumentations, theories, other speculative constructs that have emerged that could certainly be deemed hateful by the powers that be. So we are going to be very, very conscientious in how we approach today's topic. So I am going to be focusing mostly on the historical Khazarian Empire, the only example of a Jewish political nation state, of, again, these Turkish nomadic peoples. Really, this whole enterprise, this whole process, beginning somewhere in the mid, let's say 630s with the fall of the Göktürk Confederation, and we'll talk a little bit, I'm going to explain a little bit more about this, but I'm going to be focusing on the historical empire and then its sort of collapse within the 13th century, the 1200s, and essentially been forgotten from history. It's in a way, it's been gone. It's no longer here. So, I mean, even the evidence. I mean, again, these were nomadic people, so they had sort of huts, they had tents, they had a different type of dwelling places. So even the historical evidence of their culture is very scant. It's very difficult to find information. A few scholars have tried to tackle this topic of the Khazarian Empire. But what I found so interesting is how important Khazarian Empire was. And there's a Byzantine chronicler talking about the sort of golden seals of the transmission of political envelopes and messages throughout this time period. And he mentioned the 3 gold stamps of the Khazarians as opposed to the Frankish kings and the Persian kings. They used 2 golden stamps. Well, Khazaria gets 3. Well, what is Khazaria? How is it so wealthy? And what's so amazing, I mean, many people don't even know the Byzantine Empire. And so Byzantium's going to play an important factor in today's conversation, along with what was the Sassanid Empire in Persia, which eventually gets conquered by the Arabs, the Muslim conquest of Persia. And then Persia becomes Muslim. And we see the Umayyad Caliphate, eventually they fall to the Abbasid Caliphate, and how this relates, again, to these Turkish peoples north of the Caucasus area. And so where we're going to be focusing today is, again, on the geopolitical and the historical understanding of this Khazarian Empire. Now, this has branched out into, obviously, more controversial arguments. Now, I'm going to be reading sections from This book here, The Silk Roads, as will be very clear here in a minute why it's obviously in there. But then in this book, this is written by Arthur Koestler, is a Hungarian Jew, and he wrote this controversial, now very controversial book in an attempt to do away with anti-Semitism in the sense of arguing that Jewish people are one specific monolithic ethnic community, ethnic race throughout history. Obviously, the Bible insinuates evidences of interracial marriages and the like. But then he argues this whole book then, really the second half is on the Exodus, the fall of the Khazarian Empire, and him taking up questions concerning Eastern European Jews, Ashkenazi Jews, and their potentially Turkic origins. I am not going to get into this conversation. We're totally going to avoid looking into the genetic identity of Ashkenazi Jews. If you're interested in the more controversial aspects of this topic, feel free to get this book and read the second half yourself. And then you can look into the sort of modern genetic testings or argumentation that's been put forth to claim that this is a conspiracy theory. So in the attempts, again, to avoid any censorship, to avoid any recommendations to my channel, we are going to be avoiding the more controversial argument here that the Khazarian Jewish Empire, this has been put forth, this is a speculative theory, again, that's really got going by Arthur Koestler, but other scholars still argue that Eastern Jewry, Eastern European Jews, were not Sephardic transplants. Sephardism, the sort of Spanish Jewry that goes up the Iberian Peninsula, they were not Sephardic Jews that made their way over to the Rhine, the major river there in Germany, crossed the Rhine, made their way across Germany into places like Poland and Lithuania and Hungary. The argument that he puts forth is that the Magyars, another Turkish people who then essentially settle and comprise what we can say contemporary Hungary, that they were persecuted by the Pechenegs. They were pushed in their current area, and with the fall of Khazaria due to Genghis Khan in Mongolia and the Mongols, that then the many Jews of the Khazarian Empire fled their way into Eastern Europe. So that is the controversial argument. I'm sure that's what many people are here to hear more about, but we're not going to be diving into that. We're going to be focusing on the historical evidence of the actual Khazarian Empire so we can understand its context within history, how it relates to other empires, its rise, its prominence, its influence, its fall, how that relates to history, and then we can certainly point that there are controversial theories out there concerning the identity of what people call Ashkenazi Jews. The typical argument is obviously Ashkenazi Jews are of Germanic descent. Okay? So that is the official argument. I just want to put that out there just so the algorithm in YouTube knows what the intention of today's stream is. Okay. So this great narrative, I think it's going to be even more fascinating because then hopefully people can use this stream not so much for, going deeper into potential theories, but to have a firm basis, a historical basis on what this empire is and where it comes from. So to begin, we need to understand, again, history. I've talked about how I love history. When you don't know history, when you don't learn history, in a sense, you're a sort of species with amnesia. So Khazaria is, in fact, a real empire. This isn't something, I saw somebody in the comment section here leading up. They said, is Khazaria real? Khazaria is absolutely real. And it's absolutely fascinating how this Turkish nomadic tribe essentially came to dominate a particular region in the world. And so let me show you real quickly. This is the general region. So this is from a YouTube video that's very useful that I am not going to be playing due to copyright purposes. But we can see this map right here. And these rivers are very, very, very important to understand, again, geographical location. So we have the Bulgars over here. Again, what would consider to be on the far left here, modern-day Bulgaria, the Black Sea, right, the Balkan area. And we have the Byzantine Empire that controlled that sort of what would be modern-day Turkey. And then we have the Caucasus region. That would be Georgia. That would be Armenia. What would be considered today contemporary Azerbaijan. And those are obviously people of ancient histories, particularly the Armenians and the Georgians. And so this map that I'm showing you is basically showing you, again, if you focus here, see how there's a big X between these rivers? This is the Caspian Steppe. What we would call the Caspian Sea was actually the Khazarian Sea at one point. And we see that there's this blue haze here is what we would call the Khazarian Empire, the Khazarian Cognate, because they were ruled by these various Khagans. So by the year 600, this sort of region, this central steppe region, was controlled basically by a variety of different peoples. But there was a Göktürk. Göktürk was basically a confederation of 10 tribes. Okay, let me see if I can find that. So here it is, Göktürks. Here's the Wikipedia. It's basically it was comprised of multiple, again, confederation of Turkic peoples and medieval Inner Asia. Now, these peoples basically had, they were called the 10 Arrows. There was 10 major Turkic tribes, and they had basically a confederation that had a foothold across what we would call Central Asia. And remember the Huns, Attila and the Huns. This is all right before this period where in the 400s, the 500s, the Huns are making incredible inroads. And there's certainly questions regarding Attila the Hun's ethnicity. Many speculate Eastern Asian, some... Again, they vary. But anyways, this whole Central Asian area was, at the time of the 600s, so Attila the Hun, I mean, we're talking 400s then, so a couple hundred years later, the 600s, this Göktürk confederation falls apart. And as it falls apart, the sort of Central Asian area, you have all these Turkic nomadic tribes. They're all shamanistic, they're pagan, and so... this confederation fully falls apart around the 630s, 630 AD. And it's here that a group within this sort of confederation known as the Khazars began to dominate and grow in prominence and basically establish the power vacuum of the Western steppes. Again, this area between the Caucasus region, the Caspian Sea, the Black Sea, all the way up to Kiev. And this is where our conversation, the conversion of the Russian people, the Slavic people, is going to play a tremendous and important role here in regards to the decline of the Khazar Empire. So the 630s, we see the Khazars begin to fill this sort of Western power vacuum in Central Asia. Remember, when did Muhammad exist? When does the rite of Islam exist? This same exact period. So in the 620s, we have Muhammad. We have the rise of Islam. And so at the same period where we see Central Asia, once a confederate of stable powers, they're falling apart. Now we have all these tribal Turkish nomadic peoples vying for power. At the same time, we see Arabia begin to unify through Islam. And it's become so powerful that it dominates Persia, right? So in the 630s, you have the growth of Muslim Arabia. 633 to 654, you have the Muslim conquest of Persia. Persia was a Sassanid empire. It was a Zoroastrian empire. So you see the fall of the Zoroastrian empire become Islamic Persia, Iran, for all intensive purposes. And now we have this Khazarian force is this confederation or this consolidation of power, again, in this very, very important region. We see the Don River, the Volga River, the Black Sea, and the Caspian Sea all come together. This is essential. This is the nexus of the Silk Road, of global trade. It's absolutely essential, and this is where the Khazarian Empire really takes on the use of money lending, trading of goods, one of their big ways they made money was taxing people to use their rivers to enter into the Caspian Sea or the Black Sea, especially the Russians, the Slavic people, the Rus. And so so around the 630s here, I'm all over the place. Around the 630s, we see the consolidation of the Khazar Turkish nomadic people in this sort of Western Central Asian area, the steppes. We see the rise of Islam, and of course we have the Byzantine Empire, the Orthodox Christian Empire. So 642, we see the first Muslim Khazar War. 642, the first Muslim Khazar War, of which is a major importance, because if Islam was able to enter through the Caucasus region, they were able to essentially swarm Europe. They would be able to attack Europe, both from Eastern Europe and from the South, and they thought they were going to be able to dominate Christian Europe. Whether it be, you want to call it Orthodox or Catholicism, at this point there really isn't that full distinction. There's the Latin West and the Greek East within Christendom, but the Khazarian Empire, these Khazarian nomadic people who were noted for having red hair, blue eyes, and light skin. This is one of the phenotypes that were described throughout history concerning the Khazars, is that they had red hair, blue eyes, and they were light-skinned. Well, they defeated the Muslims and they held them back. Eventually, they advanced forward. The Khazars then defeat the Magyars, and they defeat the Bulgars in the same sort of central steppe region, and essentially establish their hegemony of this region by the time of the 650s, 660s. Okay, so as we're moving into the end of the 7th century. By the time of the 8th century, we can see the 720s to 737. We see the Second Arab Khazar War. Well, Islam at this point, now we're looking at over 100 years after the Prophet Muhammad. We see Persia is Muslim, all of Arabia is Muslim, and the Umayyad Caliphate stretches all the way from Iran, basically at the tip, almost India, all the way over to Spain, all the way across northern Africa. So Islam's a serious threat, and it's it's the number one threat for the Byzantine Empire. And whether you're Catholic West or you're Orthodox East, it doesn't matter. The Muslims are on the move. And it was only for the Khazars, these Turkish nomadic peoples, who eventually adopt Judaism. And that's part of our story today, is why did they adopt Judaism? Why do non-ethnically Jewish people make Judaism their official state religion? And we're going to dive into the political reasons for why they would do that, and how it was a sort of meeting point. Again, we can look at this map. They're right in the middle between the Arabians, the Islamic culture, and then the Greek culture. And so what do the Christians and the Muslims have in common? The Old Testament. And this is really the ways in which the Khazarian Empire came to adopt Judaism, is that the Kagan, which is sort of the king, and we'll get into some of this stuff here. I got so many sources and books and things to read, that the Kagan essentially, he saw that the shamanistic, polytheistic religion of these Turkish nomadic peoples was not as unifying nor as powerful as an at an empire level, at a sort of kingdom level. The shamanistic religions were not as effective as a monotheistic religion. And so the Kagan wanted the Khazarian Empire to become monotheistic. And so he brought the Muslims. He brought a Christian bishop. I remember in the evidence in this book it talks about it. And then he had Jews, and Jews were already there. Jews were already there due to the diaspora. And one story has it, maybe we'll be able to read it as I go through this book, is that the bishop talks about, the Jew talks about, oh, well, you as a Christian, you accept all these different things. He talks about Moses and the Torah and the Old Testament. And then he says the same thing to the Muslim. The Muslim accepts the Torah and Moses and the Old Testament. And then he asks them what the Muslim believes and what the Christian believes. And then the Christian starts getting into, well, we believe in the Logos. It's the second person that he incarnated as a historical entity of Jesus Christ. And then that's where the Jew tells the Kagan, you see, they all accept my beliefs, but I don't accept their beliefs. And this was the basis for why the Khazarian Empire then adopted Judaism as its official monotheistic religion, and that only the royal family, the Khagans, the Khazarian royals, were Jewish. But they propagated Judaism throughout the empire, but at the same time, they allowed Muslims and Christians to be there, and also shamanistic, indigenous sort of tribal religion as well. But they were then also convinced that when they read the Old Testament, in a way, they were also the sort of chosen people to a degree. And so one of the controversies that eventually emerged within the Jewish world was that how Talmudic were the Khazarian Empire, because actually they were a type of a heresy for the longest time. It wasn't until a couple years, or about 100 years after they made Judaism their official religion, that they got rabbis to come in to start propagating rabbinical Judaism, Talmudic Judaism. They were practicing what are called the Karaites. It's a heresy within Judaism. It's the rejection of rabbinical or Talmudic Judaism and only practicing the sort of Old Testament Torah form of Judaism. This was the religion that they had. That's why you can still find Crimean Karaites. Crimean Karaites still exist. These mountain Jews within the Caucasus region still exist. And they may actually be some of the oldest examples of Jews in diaspora. So, very interesting stuff. Again, as I said, by the 720s to 737, we had the Second Arab Khazar War. And the Muslims were making real advance. If it wasn't for the fact that the Muslims were also fighting a war front against the Franks over in Europe, and they were also fighting the Byzantines over in Turkey, and they were also fighting the Khazarians over in the Caucasus, they probably would have been more successful. They actually made their way all the way into the capital of the Khazarian Empire and forced the Khagan to convert to Islam, which really, as everybody historically knows now, was not a real conversion, obviously, because he then converts to Judaism just 3 years later. So 3 years later, he makes the official conversion where the empire now becomes a Jewish empire. So by around the 750s, okay, so again, we had the Second Arab Khazar War, 720 to 737. This is major in history, because if the Muslims would have defeated the Khazarians and made their way into Eastern Europe, they would have been fighting the Europeans on three fronts, basically. On the Byzantine front, on the French front, and then on the Eastern European front. So Khazaria is essential to even Europe maintaining its Christianity. It's a very, very important piece of history that I was surprised I didn't know that much about. And that's why I want to share with you guys today. So this in 750, the Umayyad Caliphate, the Muslim Caliphate that was ruling the second caliphate of early Islamic history, the second caliphate falls, or we have what's called the Abbasid Revolution, and the Abbasids then take control of the caliphate, and they are much less expansionistic than the Umayyad Caliphate. And this is where we get the Muslim or the Islamic Golden Age. You see, by 750, we have the Abbasid Revolution, which then reorients the power structure of the Muslim world, in which they become more self-reflective. Instead of this military expansionist project that it was since the beginning of Muhammad, it basically it slows down. It controls its resources, becomes a little bit more self-reflective, and this is where we get all the poems and the Rumis of the world, and the all the astrologers and the Avicennas and all this different stuff is that real golden period, basically between the 700s to the 1200s of Islam, which really then is really Iranian. It's not, the golden age of Islam really isn't that Arab. It's mostly Persian. It's mostly Iranian. Anyways, 740s, we have the official conversion of the Khazarian Empire to Judaism. And they thrive. I'm talking wealth beyond wealth. We have the Byzantine emperor sending daughters to marry the Khagan, of which the Khagan has like 28 wives. And so we see a real interest in the Byzantine Empire to establish friendly relationships with the Khazarian Empire, because obviously Khazars are controlling the growth, the expansion of Islam into the Central Asian area. At the same time, you have the Rus, you have the Vikings, you have the Danes and the Norwegians, sailing these rivers and looting and taking things and even being a sort of nuisance to the Byzantine Empire. And so Khazaria then was great in the sense that they also controlled the Rus. The Rus couldn't get to that central place, that X point. You see where those rivers come together inside that blue haze? It's the Volga, it's the Don, it's the Black Sea, it's the Caspian Sea. This is an essential nexus point just for travel, for goods, for products, for power. And so the Khazarians then controlled the Rus. It isn't until later that the Rus start to actually make ways into the Khazarian Empire that the Byzantines say, I don't know, maybe we should reorient our relationships more toward the Rus, more toward the Slavic people. This is the 900s. Eventually you get Sviatoslav, the Grand Prince of Kiev, then sacks the capital city of the Khazarian Empire, and essentially from that point forward, Sviatoslav, Prince of Kiev, sacks Atil in 960. So basically you have 200 years of Khazarian dominance. Arguably one of the wealthiest empires at this point. You had China, and then in China, it's the Tang Dynasty that actually caused this great collapse within Central Asia. As we were talking about the Gokturk Confederation, these 10 tribes that are basically confederated, the Tang Dynasty wasn't interested. The Tang Chinese dynasty pushed these people out so far. That's what, and this is a whole scholastic debate on the word Turk or Turkish, or why we call them Turks, and how this is related to a linguistic group, that it goes all the way back to China and the Tang Dynasty kicking these people out, which caused a cascade from the 500s later of these Turkish nomadic peoples moving west, all the way from China, where this process then continues. And so the king of Persia, he had 3 seats for principalities to come. It was a symbolic gesture. They never actually came to Baghdad, but he had a seat for the emperor of Byzantium, he had a seat for the emperor of China, and he had a seat for the Kagan of the Khazars, which lets you know how wealthy and how powerful the Khazarian Empire was during this point in history. And so once Vladimir the Great then converts to Islam, the game is over. I mean, Vladimir the Great converts to Orthodoxy. The game is over for the Khazars, because now the entire Norwegian, Slavic, Rus dynamic that eventually they were partnered with Byzantium to fight off. Now Byzantium's now in agreement with them. They send daughters. They marry off their women to some of these Slavic princes and kings, Vladimir the Great. And what in turns happens, the Russian people become Christian, and now Byzantium doubles in size, and Khazaria is now put in an even more difficult point. And this is all after, again, the conversion of Vladimir is after Sviatoslav, the Grand Prince of Kiev, sacks Atil, the major city for Khazaria. So this is basically just a quick introduction of everything that I want to show with you guys today. Again, we're going to be diving into Khazaria, and I really want that anybody who watches this stream to go away to have a very solid basis for the historical trajectory of this Khazarian Empire. The only example outside of the present state of Israel for a politically religiously identified Jewish nation, the Khazarian Empire. So, guys, smash that like. We're going to be diving deeper into this stuff. So, hope everybody really enjoys this topic.